Hello, welcome to CIS 137 Class 16. So today we're going to go over an introduction to search engine optimization, also known as SEO. Uh, and then we're going to go into CSS selectors and then more about CSS. So search engine optimization is a set of methodologies to optimize your website so it will be searched, will be crawled by search providers better, and it will show up higher in the organic results of search results. So this is very important because how your site shows up in the search engines such as Google, Yahoo, or Bing will affect how many visitors you get ultimately to your site. So that's basically the way people browse the web now is they'll search for something in Google, and based on Google search algorithms they'll get certain results, and usually the first results will get the most visits. Now let's look at what that would look like. So if we're on Google and we search for something like search engine optimization, what we see first are the paid advertisements. So people have paid to be listed when this term, these set of keywords, are searched on the web. So these are all pay per click up here. So whenever they get a click from this, they have to pay Google a certain number of a certain amount of money. But down here, the ad-free ones are organic search results. The higher you are up on this list, the more likely someone is going to click on it. So if we click on this, this has the highest ranking result for search engine optimization. So I guess since they're at the top and they're about SEO, you could probably trust this source, right? So if we look at Google's search algorithm, this is actually a closely guarded secret by Google, but here are some insights onto how it actually works. So Google takes a lot of time to figure out or try to figure out the context of what you are trying to search for. And this could be based on your recent searches. It could be based on where you are in the world. But then how the sites are actually ranked based on that context has to do with their ranking algorithm. It says that these algorithms analyze hundreds of different factors to try to surface the best information the web can offer, from the freshness of content to the number of times your search terms appear and whether a page has a good user experience. So Google's trying to figure out what sites are legitimate and what sites are just trying to get your clicks. And they have a variety of algorithms to deal with the various factors involved. These days, let me jump back to the slides. The most important things have to do with if you have relevant content on your site for the search term, how many other sites link to your site and how relevant those sites are. So, you can't just throw links everywhere. And if the site has a good user experience. Now, these are just some of the factors. And some people try to game this system by repeating the search term over and over again in their content, but not actually having real relevant content. And there's these link sharing programs where you can hide links on your page to other sites, and they'll link back to you in order to increase your popularity or your linkage. But Google actually can detect that now and will blacklist you. And the good user experience, just make sure all the content is accessible on your page. And for the good user experience part, there are some webmaster guidelines. So the basic guidelines are that you should make pages primarily for users, not for search engines. So Google will reward you if you focus on your users, and you shouldn't deceive your users. So make them think that they're clicking into something about search engine optimization if we search for that. But really, you just have search engine optimization listed 50 times in order to get people to click in, and it's just an ad site. So avoid tricks intended to improve search engine ranking. So you can't like really target SEO uh, at the expense of actual content. So a good rule of thumb is whether you'd feel comfortable explaining what you've done to a website that competes with you or to a Google employee. Another useful test is to ask, does this help my users? Would I do this if search engines didn't exist? And then think about what makes your website unique, valuable, or engaging. Make your website stand out from others in your field. So these guidelines are here. So you can help Google find your pages, help Google understand your pages, help visitors use your pages. And it tells you what to avoid and what to follow. So what are some ways you can help your search engine optimization? Well, one way you can do this is with putting certain tags in your head element. So one important part of your head element is the title element. And this is what actually shows up in the search results. So if we go back to the search results, the title will show up here. And you see it should be 65 characters. If it gets too long, then you get a dot, dot, dot at the end. Next, you can add a meta tag for description. So this would just look like this inside of your head. Meta name, description, content. This is a description. And this is what shows on the search results under the title. So we see here, get started learning all about SEO from the industry's most trusted search source, Search Engine Land. So look at their HTML real quick. So inspect this page. We have a lot going on here. Going to the head, and we see description, get started learning all about SEO from the industry's most trusted source, Search Engine Land, reviews basics of search engine optimization, ranking factors, and more. And here's their title right here. So both of these are showing up in the search results over here. And third, we can add a metadata tag for keywords. So this will help the search engine crawler that comes to your site automatically to parse your site and determine what keywords you think are important for the site. The crawler could just ignore this, but a lot of crawlers will use this and compare it to the actual content of your site to give you a ranking. Let's see if there's keywords in here. There's news keywords. Yeah, they don't have a keyword section on here, and that's fine. Now, one problem is in React, if we look at our project, let me pull one up. In React, we're using a single page app. So that means that, we have one public index.html that has a head element in it, and then it has the div ID of root. Let me pull that up. Then when you're rendering your React app, you're actually just affecting the HTML inside of the div placeholder. So let's see, pull this over. So if we look at the public index.html, we have the head up here, and then we have a div ID equals root. This is where all your React app lives. So specifying the head on each page doesn't really make sense in React because there's only one single page. So in order to affect the title on page changes, we need to use the JavaScript DOM manipulation with document.title. So you can say document.title equals, page title. And if you want to change the description per page, you need to use something like this: document.querySelector, meta name description, dot set attribute content. This is description. So this is actually pretty hard to know from the get. And search engines might just ignore these JavaScript set values anyway, because they'll load up the page and pull out the keywords, the description, the title when it first loads the page, and when it clicks links, it'll just see the content is changing, but the page isn't actually changing. So it may ignore anything on subsequent pages. But improving search engine crawlers all the time, single page architectures are pretty popular. So they're getting better at detecting, the multiple pages within a single page architecture. So it's worth, trying to set these. Now, the best place to set something like that would be inside of component did mount. So it looks like this project doesn't have React Router app installed, React Router in here at all. But if it did, we could have put set the title up here. I'm just going to check this one other project. Okay, this one has it. So this project currently has a title inside of public index.html, and the title is right here. We could set the title inside of events. This is just a so all of these are just functions. So in order to set the title, we'd have to turn it into a class, which you can do. So export default class, home extends component. This will become the render function. And then we could add a component did mount. We can set the title. So just look like document title equals club dash home. We could do this on every page. And I never pulled in component. So component was not defined, and that's because component's up here. I could use React.component, or I could import it like this. Now we see the title has a dash home there. I can make it more obvious. I could just make this called SHSW or SHSC home, and we'll re-render, and we see it set right there. If you want to change when we click on something like events, we go to events. We can make this a class as well. This is a render method down here that we're extending, and we'll set the component mount where it'll set the title. I see events, and we click on home, it'll say home. So notice how the title is changing when I click on each of these. So the most important part, though, is not about what you put in the head. The most important part is how your content is laid out, how much content you have, how often you update that content on your site, and how relevant it is to the keywords that are being searched. And on top of that, Google actually considers your YouTube videos that link to your site, considers Facebook, social media, Twitter, to see how many people are linking to your site and to try to determine the popularity and relevance of your site. And it really tries to filter out spam or anything trying to game the system. So just make your site actually useful, and it'll show up hopefully organically in the search engine results. And even if you pay per click, your site still needs to be relevant in order to actually show up in the ad search results. So you can't really game the system. So next up, we're going to talk about CSS Selectors. In previous classes, we learned about Bulma and how you can use that with your site. And that's a good starting point, but you still need to make customizations through CSS for your particular site. So you may not like how Bulma, renders certain things, and you want to, enhance it. Well, you'll still need to write a CSS style sheet to, manipulate the styles. So the key to CSS style sheets is being able to write good selectors in CSS. And what are selectors? So if we look at our CSS here, so we have app.css, the selectors are these parts above the curly braces. So everything inside the curly braces is the style that'll be applied to the elements that match this selector up here. So various ways you can select elements, and we'll show them off on this code pin. So here I have just some HTML that's completely unstyled at this time. It's actually using the browser's default styles. So the browser says that H1 should be this big and H2 should be this big. Paragraphs should have this much margin between them, and links should be blue. Lists should have dots, bullets to the left of them. This is the default style from the browser. We're not specifying any CSS. This is just what the browser does. Each browser could do slightly different renderings or different stylings. In order to override it, we would need to write our own CSS. So first selector is we can select all elements with a star, and this is a way to, we could increase the font size, or we can make all the text blue, or make it dark green. So now all the text is dark green. To get more specific, we could select all elements by type. So this would be the tag type. So this tag name right here. So we could select all LI elements by saying LI. And we could give these a background color, for instance. Now each LI element will have a background color, and we could give it a margin as well. Say margin top half of an REM, and now each one's separated. We could do any tag name in here. So this tag name is going to match, these tag names over here. So we could affect the H2s as well. We could put that in here, and we can make the H2s have, a different background color or whatever we want. Background colors are just easy to see, so that's why I'm using them. This site is looking pretty terrible. That's okay. Next, we can select an element straight by its ID. So we would prefix whatever selector we have with the hashtag to indicate that we want to search by ID. And this is targeting a single element usually, because ID should be unique on your page. So let's see, do we have an ID in here? No. We can add one. We call this P excitement. So to target, we didn't put the hashtag over here, but we're going to put it over here. And we'll make excitement. We'll put a border around it. We get 4 pixels, double lines, and making an exciting color. I don't know what would be a good exciting color. How about blue? So there we go. So now it has a blue box around it. We can add a little bit more to it by make this large. There we go. We can add a little bit of padding in there. Now we can see the excitement element is specifically targeted with this ID selector. So next we could do elements by class. So if we look up here, we have a class of speakers. So notice there's no dot inside of this class here. In React, it'll look like class name equals speakers. So to select all elements that match that class, we just use dot speakers. Here we could, affect the padding or something along that. We could add. How about we just add a box? That's the easiest to see right now. So make it 1 pixel solid black. So now this whole UL is surrounded by a black border. Now we could put that class in multiple places. So unlike an ID, you're supposed to use a class in multiple places, and we do that. Every element that has a speakers class will have this style applied to it. So those are all selectors that we did it by all elements, by tag type, by ID, and by class. You can also define relationships and elements that should be styled based on their parents. So one relationship is a descendant. So to indicate a descendant, you would just have a space between the selectors. Let's just do an example of that. Close this. Keeps on selecting that. Okay, so let's see. We have a UL and then an LI inside of here. And we have a main with the P inside of it. So let's do the relationship of a main, all the P elements inside. And with these, we'll give them all a bigger size. That affects all the P elements inside of the main element. And if we had a P element outside of the main element, see, this has a normal font size. So I selected all the P elements inside of main. Right, even if we had a nested P inside of here, that element is also has this style applied to it. Next, we could indicate a child relationship. So this is a direct descendant to the parent. So if we put is greater than sign inside of here, it's kind of like an arrow, then any element that is the direct child of that parent element will be selected and have that style applied. So for instance, if we change this to main key like that, then it'll only apply that font size increase to these direct children, and then this nested one goes back to normal font size. So you can put a space in here if you'd like, and this left side could be any selector, and this right side can be any selector as well. So we could do dot speakers, had that, or dot content, and we could add a class to main called content, to make it more flexible, so we could apply this style to anything that has this class. And here's, I feel like, a less used feature with relationships is siblings. So instead of defining the parent-child relationship, you would define elements that are next to each other at the same level. So to indicate that, you would have the plus sign. So this says style all the P elements that are adjacent to an H2 element. Actually, I have that here. We have H2 next to this P. H2 plus P. We're going to make that background color yellow just to make our site even grosser. We see this first, the excitement P element, the paragraph element, is next to this H2, so it gets a yellow background. Now let's say we want to do all of these siblings here. On CSS3, instead of using this plus sign, we'd use the tilde. Now all the P elements that are direct siblings with this H2 element are getting rendered with a yellow background. Now this nested element you see here is not getting a yellow background, and this P that is outside of the main content is not a sibling with the H2, so it's also not getting that yellow. If we added H2 here, we see now this P element is a sibling to H2, so it gets a yellow background. So next, you could select multiple elements or have multiple selectors at the in this part up here in the selector section by separating them by commas. So for instance, we have H2 with background color red. If we wanted to apply that to H1 as well, we could have a comma H1. Now all H1s and H2s will have a background color of red. We could extend that farther. We could put that on P. We could put that on LI. Make everything have red. Another combination of selectors, so that selects more elements. But if you want to select a more specific element, you can specify a specific tag that has a specific class. So for instance, we have this speakers class down here, and we applied it to a P element, and we applied it to this UL element. And we realized that we really only wanted the UL speakers instead of this the P speakers as well. So instead of saying just dot speakers, we would put a tag name first, and then no space, because if you put a space, it means descendant. So no space, just a tag name, and then the dot class name. We do that, and the border is only applied to the unordered list and not the paragraph anymore. So it says find all unordered lists with the class speakers and apply this style to it. Now another more advanced way to select elements is by using attribute selectors. So attribute selectors inspect the tag, the HTML tag, and they look through the attributes of that particular tag determine if it should be selected by the CSS. So for instance, if you see up here, we have the star, which means select all elements, but then we have attribute selector after that, and attribute selector is indicated with these square brackets. Now what this is saying is I want all elements that have an href attribute somewhere inside of them. So if we look over here, we have href inside of our anchor links. We say star href. We want all the links to have a color of blue. Now if we add an href onto something random like this h1 element, even though that doesn't make sense for an h1 element, the CSS selector will find that it has this href as a attribute with the attribute selector, and it'll change the color to blue. Another example is we could select all anchor elements with the disabled tag. So to indicate something's disabled, you just say disabled, and then you can set something like the cursor to disabled. I don't remember what the exact. Try this out, and if it doesn't work, yeah, we need a different cursor. Let's look it up. So CSS style cursors. So here are some down here. We have not allowed. Let's try it out. That's what we want. Not allowed. So now we see this middle link that has a disabled attribute will show not allowed. Of course, clicking on it still works, so you'd have to do some extra logic to make sure it's not clickable. With attribute selectors, these disabled and href just to check if the attribute actually exists in the tag. But you can actually inspect what that attribute's values are as well. So say you want to select all input type submit, so all the submit buttons in your page, you would just have that equal sign and then the value you want it to match. Let's do a different example, or we can add this input button. Let's add some inputs. We have input type equals text, and this would be like a text field. We see it down here. This is a text field. If we had a form, we could have input type equal button, or sorry, submit. Also create a submit button here next to our text box. Now say we want to, if we try to just select all input elements and make them all, another color I haven't used yet, purple. See, our submit button turns purple, and the text we put in here is purple. Now, if we really just want to select, if we just want to make the button text purple, we set the type equals submit here. Now the button is purple, but this text is green because of our star color dark green here. So you're looking beautiful. All right, so those are all the CSS selectors that you need to know about right now. There's actually more about CSS we'll go over now. CSS has this concept of pseudo classes. So these are not really elements within your page, but you can select them anyway. So for instance, uh, these are certain states that a element could be in. So a link that hasn't been visited can be selected by using :link. So what does that look like exactly? So that :link is put after whatever selector you have. Or say all A elements that haven't been visited yet. So A link will be, will have a border around them. That looks terrible. Let's make it a little bit smaller. Then we could affect visited links separately. The visited links could look like that, and they could have a color of, gray or something. All of these links cannot be visited because they're not valid links, so we can't see that here. Maybe if we can add something like Google. When we click this, it's not going to allow a external link inside a code pen. But you see the visited link is now gray. So active is a link that is being clicked. People use this to show interactivity in their website. As it's being clicked, we could change the font size, for instance. So now, as I'm clicking it, and when I let go, it will shrink back to normal size. Hover, when the mouse cursor is over the element, it'll change. So we can change the background color on hover. And this doesn't have to be an A, it could be anything inside of here. So we can make it a P hover, background color, and make this site really unusable. Pink background whenever you hover over something. So all the P elements will now, as you hover over them, they'll turn pink. Now in CSS3, you can also pick elements based on their hierarchy using the first child, last child, or only child. So for instance, inside of our UL, we could say the first child of the UL, the unordered list, will have a background color of, running out of colors here, let's say dark yellow. Maybe dark yellow is not valid. Let's call it red. We can say last child. Seems like it's not working exactly. I don't know why. So let's try one thing in here. Let's add this main. See, I'm not getting that to work exactly right. So let's check it out. So if we go to pseudo classes, we can see a variety of pseudo classes here. Use selector : pseudo class and all the link stuff here. You can combine any selector with a pseudo class here. So only highlighted, or it says all anchors with the highlight class that are hovered right now, I would like to have red. Now if we go down to CSS3, the first child, so here we go, I'm doing it completely wrong. So in the following example, the selector matches any p element that is the first child of any element. So I'm doing this backwards. So I'm saying the UL that is the first child of any element. Really what I wanted was the LI that's the first child, and the LI is the last child. So the first child we see has a red background, and the last child has a green background. So you can combine these together, say match the first I element in all P elements. So go through these examples, they're pretty good. The only child CS selector I have right here, I've never really seen that used anywhere, but I assume it would only select it if it is the only child within an element. That could be useful. Now just like, oh, here's a missed typo. Just like we have pseudo classes, there are pseudo elements inside of our page too, and we indicate those with double colons instead of a single colon. So we could select the first letter, first line, or we could select before an element, after an element, or when an element is being selected. So for instance, let's look at this selected one. So when we go like this on a web page, we are selecting certain text. We're going to, inside the P paragraph, we're going to grab the selection, we're going to set the background color to, we'll use just a random color. Now whenever we're selecting, we don't get that default select, we just get whatever color that we specified there. You know, we could even do some crazy stuff with the font size. I don't know if that's going to actually work. Yeah, we're making it think, it's going to crash my computer. Okay, that's probably not going to work. So the before elements and after pseudo elements are useful as well. So say, for instance, we want to add, and we can look at these examples on this site here. Because here, the first line inside of the paragraph will have small caps. And then the second line is styled normally. And you can see here are the properties we're allowed to set for these pseudo elements. First letter, we can make an extra large first letter to make it look like a newspaper. And here's a neat one. So we could, before every header tag, add a smiley face. So here we just have H1, this is a heading, H1, this is a heading, and we're adding in the smiley face for each of those. After, we can do the same thing with after to put it after. And the CSS selection pseudo element, I try to set the font size, but that's not one of the allowed properties. The only properties that are allowed are color, background, cursor, and outline. See, when we highlight text in here, it has a yellow background and a red, it makes the text red. There we go. Here's Firefox support up here. So it says any selection, make the color red, background yellow, and any text will have that applied. We could change this to say only P elements will have this selection. So if we select this text up here, it's normal. But then if we select the paragraph text, it'll have yellow and red. And this is not paragraph text here. This is paragraph text here. So we can really customize the selection process. How do these styles get applied? So cascading style sheets, CSS, has a cascading way of applying styles, and that's why they're called cascade style sheets. So the way they apply rules in Cascade in CSS is to find the most relevant and specific style for current element, and then applying those rules for that whatever selector matches to that element. So the general order that these rules get applied is that it looks for styles that are marked as important in a style sheet first. And if a style is indicated as important, then that style will get applied. So let's go over here. I'll show you what I mean. So I can say the background color on H2 and H1 being red is important, and we would just put important after the rule we want to indicate as important. So that means if we try to go later and set the background color of H1 to blue, this won't get applied because this red one is more important because it has this exclamation point important. And we can make blue important too, and that would put it at the same level as red, and it will get applied instead. And I'll explain why that happens in a second. Then it looks for important rules in HTML. So this could be the when you have a style on the actual element. So we can say style, background color, blue. So see, this background color blue is not being set by the this style right here because we have the red important. If we took off red important, then the blue would happen here. Then we could say this blue is important. And because it's important here, it actually gets applied to the element. I think this should be opposite here. So I think it should be really HTML style sheet. I got these from the book, by the way. But I'm pretty sure the book is backwards in this. Being that we can see it right here, this blue is being applied over this red. So next we have the normal rules in a web page are applied if there's no important ones above it. So if we have a background color blue, it's not applied because we have an important, but if we took away the important, then it is applied. It overrides that background color set by the style sheet. And then the normal rules in the style sheet will apply. So if we, if we had background color green here, H1, that'll get applied if we didn't have that background color set on the actual tag here. So now the background color green. And then last, it'll fall back to default rules in the web browser. So for instance, on these list items, we don't have the bullet type set, but the default style for the browser is to have a circle bullet next to our li elements. So let's say we have rules at the same level. So we have our levels defined here. So let's say we have two normal rules in a style sheet. Which one gets applied? So here we have an H1 that has background color red and H1 that has background color green. So in this case, the style that appears last on the page or last in the style sheets from top to bottom, depending even on how they're imported into the page, the last one is the style that will be applied, the rule that will be applied to that element. So if we change the order of these and put the green before the red, element will remain red. And we could specify a different thing here, and it will get applied. Same rule as down there. This rule down here will override whatever background color we have set in this prior, or this prior rule set. So the last rule from top to bottom wins if both have same specificity. So the more specific a select is, the more precedence it has in having the style rule applied. So the more specific rule wins. So the ID is the most specific. So if we have, like we have here, the tag excitement, that is a very specific element, and that will beat our P elements. So we have P excitement, normal P elements. So we have normal P elements have size to RPM. Let's say we're going to add font size, make it smaller. So now that even though this excitement selector is before this descendant selector, this child selector, this font size rule gets applied because this is more specific than this, because it's an ID. So if we specify a class, attribute selector, or pseudo class, it's going to be less specific than indicating the ID exactly. So the ID would beat anything that's just selecting by class, attribute selector, or pseudo class. Then if we're selecting by element or pseudo element, so that's like if we use H1 or span, that's going to be the least specific. So a class will override the general tags or the element selector. Then on top of this, if you have the descendant selector, that's going to override a non-descendant selector. So for instance, we have content and then the greater than P means that I want all direct paragraph elements that are children of the content class. If we had just P in here, this is a terrible show it. Maybe I'll show it. Okay, normal size versus 2 REM. So this is more specific up here because it is it defines this parent-child relationship. But if we made this more specific, we could say want the main element, and then we want the content. I'm going to select all content classes within main. So really main is the content one, so we say main.content. Then this is more specific, it has more levels than this one up here. And we can prove it still works even when we put it before the selector. So this selector involves more selectors in it, so it therefore is more specific. So last we can search in Chrome. We can see how these CSS rules are being applied. And we could view it here. So when we right-click or context click on an element, we can do inspect, and we can see the rules that are being applied on the right side here under styles. On here we can see that H2, H1 is being set to background color red, and this is based on our style sheet. The H1 is also getting the font size of 6 rem, and it's from the wildcard it's getting a dark green color. This user agent style sheet is the browser style sheet. So the browser has a display rule for H1s that makes them block elements, or block versus inline elements from a few classes ago. It sets the font size automatically to 2 em, and it sets some margins, and it sets the font weight to bold. So we can actually modify these directly in here to see what would happen with our styles. So we can set the font weight, for instance, normal. And we can see this get crossed out down here. So we're overriding the font weight with a more specific selector. This is the browser selector, so anything we put in our style sheets will override the browser. So we could override this wildcard selector. We could override the color there by putting a color up here. So with this, we can also see the amount of margin on the when we learned about the box model. You can see the margin, the border, the padding, and the actual height and width of the element. We see it has no border, no padding, but it has a 64 pixel margin. You can also see it in the computed. You can see all the possible style elements down here that could be applied to this, and their current values, their default values. And these two tabs will tell you everything you need to know about the CSS of a particular element. So we can change what element we're looking at by clicking on it over here, or we could right-click again and do inspect. So I'm going to click on this UL. And here we see the UL.speakers is setting the border 1 pixel solid black and the color dark green of the text from the wildcard element. And we can do this with any site we want to go to. So let's go to this site. So for instance, if we want to see what font are we using on this header up here. So here we see the font family is Barrio, or it falls back to cursive. The font size is 5 em, and the text shadow is 3 pixels white, 2 pixels for the blue. But we can turn off the text shadow by unclicking it. It doesn't seem to do anything. Turn off the font size. We can change the font family to a normal font. don't know why text shadow is not working. We could select a different, all these are pretty bad. Let's go to events. So we could inspect this card and see how we did that. Let me see, it just has a display block, text align center, a border, a margin, and a width. We turn off the width to see what happens. Turn off text align, and we could just define our style here. Now, the problem with modifying your style here is that you need to remember to apply it to your code base for it to stick. If you just want to experiment, you can definitely do it in here. All right, so that's the end of today's lecture. Make sure you do project part 3. It's due by Friday, August 4th by 8 a.m. Let me know if you have any questions with that or about CSS selectors or SEO on Slack. And I'll see you all Monday.